Malintzin, the woman who dominated 3 worlds. Malintzin was born in a border region between the Nahua lords and the Mayan peoples, a territory where trade routes, local wars, and changing alliances coexisted. As a child, she heard different languages and learned to move between them with a fluidity that would later change the destiny of the continent. His childhood was marked by a silent transition. The transition from a noble girl to a young woman considered political merchandise in a world of internal wars. Colonial chronicles narrate that Malintzin was handed over or sold by her own family in an operation aimed at strengthening internal alliances. The practice was not uncommon in Mesoamerica and was applied to young women with linguistic or social skills who could serve as liaisons among communities. Malintzin first fell into the hands of Mayan merchants, who transported it to the lands of Tabasco, far from everything she knew and forced to adapt again to new customs, new norms, and new forms of survival. In Tabasco she learned the Chontal language, a variant of Mayan, used by merchants and authorities of that region. To his natural mastery of Nahuatl, he added this new tool, and his mind became a cultural bridge that no other character of his time possessed. Meanwhile, on the horizon, Spanish ships sailed ever closer, driven by Cortés's ambition and the desperation of his men to find wealth, allies, or any avenue to consolidate their presence. When the Spanish arrived in Tabasco, the confrontations, they were inevitable. When defeated, local leaders handed over gold, cloth, and a group of young women as tribute to prevent further violence. Among them was Malintzin. No one could have imagined that, of all the loot given away, she would be the decisive element in the conquest, the key negotiator between worlds that had never met. At first, the Spanish did not understand its value. They saw in it just a quiet, observant young woman. But they soon discovered that he could understand the Mayan of Jerónimo de Aguilar, the Nahuatl of Moctezuma's messengers, and that he also picked up patterns, gestures, and nuances that no one else could perceive. Cortés, recognizing her usefulness, integrated her as an interpreter and mediator in his growing diplomatic apparatus. From that moment on, Malintzin was transformed. In an indispensable figure, his role went deeper than the simple transfer of words. He was the one who deciphered intentions, political tensions, veiled traps, hidden agreements, and invisible dangers. Without it, Cortés would not have been able to establish alliances with cities hostile to the Mexicas, nor negotiate safe routes, nor understand the magnitude of the internal conflicts that bled the Tenochtitlan Empire. Malintzin was at the center of it all, listening, processing, and deciding what to convey and what to omit in each encounter. Many times he acted based on survival, both his own and that of the towns he encountered along the way. In others, their intervention facilitated transactions, agreements, and relocations that included the sale of indigenous groups as slaves or auxiliaries. There was no clear line between diplomacy and imposition. She operated in gray territory where every word could save lives or doom them. His figure moved between necessity and strategy, with no room for error. In this first section of the story, Malintzin does not appear only as an interpreter, but as a strategist, a mediator capable of guiding the Spaniards in a political framework that they have never before they would have understood on their own. Her decisions influence battles, pacts, alliances, and rivalries that forever marked the course of the invasion. While Cortés gained prestige, Malintzin gained power, not in the form of titles, but in mastery of the human map that held the balance of the entire region. History would later remember her in contradictory ways, but, at this point in his life, Malintzin was at the height of his ability and influence. She navigated between rival cultures with the serenity of one who knows that every step defines the fate of thousands. And although the most dramatic and decisive episodes of his life were still missing, it was already evident that he was building an irreplaceable role in the clash between two civilizations. Cortés's expansion into the heart of the Mexican world required a thorough understanding of regional politics. Malintzin became the voice that dismantled threats, detected conspiracies, and revealed fragments of truth that allowed us to move forward without falling into deadly traps. Every conversation he translated either opened a door or closed it forever. His role took on a greater dimension when contacts began. With emissaries from Moctezuma, who watched in astonishment the precision with which Malintzin responded in Nahuatl, dismantling ambiguities that had been designed to confuse the Spaniards. As the caravan entered indigenous territories, Malintzin developed an almost intuitive reading of the behavior of local chiefs. He understood not only the words, but the gestures, the rituals of hospitality and threat, knew when a chief feared Mexican retaliation, when he sought an advantageous pact, or when he planned to betray the newcomers. Her interventions shaped the tactical and diplomatic decisions of Cortés, who increasingly depended on her to interpret not only languages, but intentions. In several encounters, Malintzin detected changes in tone, glances averted, or seemingly innocent phrases that revealed an ambush nearby. At that moment, his voice took on a weight that even Spanish captains could not challenge. She was the invisible line between staying alive and falling into a nighttime attack by local warriors. His influence was no longer just linguistic, it was strategic. When they reached Tlaxcala, the tension reached a breaking point. Tlaxcala was a people exhausted by decades of war against the Mexicas and had a collective memory marked by sacrifices, defeats, resistance, and a deep desire to free themselves. The arrival of the Spanish generated confusion. They were new enemies, unlikely allies or messengers of a destiny imposed by the gods. Malintzin was sent to negotiate with the Tlaxcaltec chiefs. It was not just a matter of translating, but of interpreting the emotional pulse of a wounded people. He saw pride, anger, weariness, and a glimmer of hope. In that meeting, she softened Cortés's stance, curbed his impulse to intimidate, and convinced him to present a clear offer: alliance in exchange for respect, territories, and freedom of domination. Mexica also knew how to speak to the Tlaxcaltecs from codes that the Spaniards were unaware of, references to old grievances, symbols shared between Nahua peoples, and a political analysis that demonstrated that the eternal war against Mexico Tenochtitlan was unsustainable. The alliance changed history. Thousands of Tlaxcaltec warriors joined the Spanish, and although they celebrated what they believed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Malintzin knew that this coalition was built on deep interests and open wounds. For the first time in the Conquest, he understood that she wasn't just translating words, she was translating destinies. The advance towards Tenochtitlan further transformed their role, where the Spaniards saw Malintzin temples and canals. It recognized agricultural cycles, trade networks, noble clans, and a complex religious structure that sustained Mexican power. His identity became a bridge between worlds that looked at each other with absolute suspicion. Arriving in the great capital, Malintzin led Cortés through streets full of flowers, endless markets, and buildings that seemed to touch the sky. She translated the greetings, veiled reproaches, and cautionary warnings that Mexican priests and nobles tried to give without breaking diplomacy. For the first time in his life, Malintzin was in the center of the city that had marked the fate of all Mesoamerica for centuries, but the initial agreements soon began to fracture. The Mexican priests were deeply suspicious of the Spanish. The Tlaxcaltecs distrusted apparent peace, and Cortés saw signs of treachery around every corner. In the midst of all this political and spiritual chaos, Malintzin was holding tense conversations. The words came wrapped in anger, fear, screams and pleas. She had to choose not only how to translate them, but how to keep each sentence from igniting conflict. During the Tenochtitlan uprisings, Malintzin experienced one of the most dangerous moments of his life. The streets were filled with barricades, the rooftops of archers and the temples of warriors shouting for the immediate expulsion of foreigners. There his work ceased to be diplomacy. It was pure survival. He had to move messages between warring factions, interpret threats, and decide what information should reach each side to avoid total massacre. His voice became a tool of containment in a city burning from its foundations. With the fall of Tenochtitlan, Malintzin's existence changed forever. Their function was no longer to negotiate alliances on the way, but to participate in the foundation of the new colonial order. Its dominance of Nahuatl, Mayan, and Spanish. It became indispensable for drafting legal documents, defining internal borders, and translating the first agreements that decided the future of thousands of indigenous communities. He witnessed the transformation of temples into churches, markets, tax control spaces, and old trade routes into roads of the new regime. Malintzin's last years were marked by contrasts. He participated in expeditions to the south. He collaborated in territorial reorganizations, witnessed legal disputes between indigenous chiefs and Spanish encomenderos, and was present in agreements that would configure the structure of the viceroyalty. She also experienced an internal process of personal reconstruction. She had gone from slave to interpreter, from interpreter to political figure, and from political figure to symbol. Little by little his name became in mirror. Each generation used it to project a different version of history. For some it was betrayal, for others survival, for some she was a collaborator, for others a victim of fate. But beyond interpretations, Malintzin remained as a woman who faced a divided world and understood the absolute power of the word in disclosure. Malintzin appears as a monumental figure, not as a victim or villain, but as the unwitting architect of an encounter that forever transformed the continent. Her life shows that empires fall not only because of armies, but because of decisions, alliances, political tensions, and above all, because of those who are capable of translating. If you like this documentary, give us a like, ring the bell, and subscribe to Rewrite Our History.